She hunted humans for sport until one caught her instead. Callum Beck's hands moved through the pre-dawn darkness, checking each sensor node around his cabin's perimeter. The modified motion detectors hummed as he tested their connections, salvaged alien components wired into his own early warning system. Frost crunched beneath his boots. October in the Rockies meant the first snows would come soon, but that wasn't what made his breath visible in sharp bursts. Something was coming. He'd felt it for 3 days now, that familiar tightness between his shoulder blades that had kept him alive through 2 tours and 1 catastrophic mission. The cabin sat in a depression surrounded by dense pine forest, accessible only by a narrow game trail he'd spent 2 years learning to navigate blind. Remote, defensible, with sightlines he controlled. To anyone scanning from above, this looked like untouched wilderness. But Callum knew better than to trust appearances. He returned inside as the sky lightened, securing the reinforced door. The interior was sparse: a bunk, a wood stove, shelves holding supplies and equipment, and weapons. The hunting rifle above the door was conventional enough, but the modified electromagnetic pulse device on the workbench wasn't. Neither was the capture net he'd spent 8 months engineering, its components spread across half the cabin floor. He'd been ready for this since he'd found Drekkar's body 2 winters ago. The alien hunter had come during a blizzard, thinking the weather would mask its approach. Instead, it had stumbled into Callum's trap line while pursuing hikers. The fight had been brief and brutal. Callum had won through desperation and luck, using the environment and the creature's overconfidence against it. He'd driven it toward a cliff edge, watched it fall, then spent a week hauling pieces of its technology back before Sprung could wash the evidence away. That equipment had taught him everything. The aliens had energy weapons relying on predictable frequencies. Their armor was strong, but had weak points at the joints. Their sensors could be fooled by specific mineral compounds in the local rock, and they hunted alone, driven by pride rather than tactical sense. Callum poured coffee and stood at the window, watching the tree line. The scanners he'd built from Drekkar's remains were crude, but they'd detect an energy signature entering atmosphere. He'd set the range at 50 miles. The alarm chirped. He set the coffee down, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The display showed a signature dropping fast about 40 miles northwest. Definitely a ship. He checked his watch. 28 minutes to gear up and move. Callum pulled on his tactical vest, checking each pocket by touch. Knife, multi-tool emergency beacon, modified frequency jammer, climbing rope, first aid kit. He grabbed the rifle, chambered a round out of habit, then headed for the hidden cache 300 yards north. Inside the hollowed-out lightning-struck pine, wrapped in waterproof tarps, was the real arsenal. EMP grenades built from Drekkar's power cells, climbing gear, the capture net, folded carefully and attached to a deployment mechanism adapted from bear trap design, and the armor, pieces of the alien's protective gear reshaped to fit human proportions. He suited up quickly, fastening the chest plate and arm guards. The material was lighter than Kevlar but stronger, the helmet he left behind. He needed his hearing clear and peripheral vision unobstructed. Callum moved through the forest like water, making no sound, leaving minimal trace. This was what he'd been trained for, before everything went wrong in Kandahar, before his team had walked into an ambush, before he'd been the only one to walk back out. He shook off the memory. Focus. Position 1 was a granite outcropping with good sight lines and 3 escape routes. Callum settled into a crevice and waited, rifle across his knees, breathing slow and measured. The sun climbed higher. Then the forest went silent. Birds stopped singing. The wind seemed to pause. Callum's grip on the rifle tightened fractionally. She was close. He could feel it the way prey animals sensed predators, some ancient part of his brain screaming warnings. Movement flickered at the edge of his vision, between 2 pines about 60 yards out. A shape that didn't belong, red and black against green and brown, tall, powerful, moving with liquid grace that made his trained eye catalog threats: speed, strength, enhanced agility. The figure paused, head tilting. Callum stayed absolutely still. From this distance, with the armor's signature scattered by surrounding rock, he'd look like part of the landscape. She'd have to rely on visual tracking, and he'd positioned himself in broken shadow. She took 3 steps forward, and he got his first clear look. The resemblance to a tiger was unmistakable, not just the red and black stripes covering her body, but the way she moved, predatory and confident. Feline ears swiveled atop her head, tracking sounds he couldn't hear. Her build was humanoid, but clearly alien, taller than any woman he'd met, with muscle definition that spoke of serious strength. She wore minimal armor and carried what looked like an energy rifle across her back. Her eyes scanned the outcropping, amber with vertical pupils, searching and calculating, beautiful and lethal. She was hunting him, and she looked absolutely certain she'd win. Callum waited until she committed to her approach, then slipped backward through the crevice and down the outcropping's far side. He had maybe 90 seconds before she realized her prey had moved. He used 60 to reach the next position, a dense thicket where his prepared path cut through at odd angles. The trick was to make her chase without letting her catch, wear down her confidence, make her angry, draw her deeper into terrain he controlled. The thicket exploded behind him as she crashed through, no longer bothering with stealth. He heard her growl, a sound that was definitely feline and definitely frustrated. Good. Angry predators made mistakes. Callum led her through the roughest country he knew, places where human agility and knowledge mattered more than raw physical power. He climbed over deadfalls, ducked through tight spaces between boulders, used every trick he'd learned in 2 years exploring these mountains. They'd been at this for 3 hours when she finally made her move. He was crossing a creek when her energy weapon shrieked. The bolt seared past his head close enough that he felt the heat. A warning shot. Callum spun and dove behind a boulder as the second shot came. The stone exploded in superheated fragments. He rolled, came up moving, and sprinted for the tree line. Another shot, another miss too close to be accidental. She was hurting him, driving him like game toward wherever she'd decided to make her kill. If she thought she was controlling this chase, she was about to learn a very important lesson. He let her push him toward the canyon, the one with the narrow entrance and steep walls. Let her think she'd cornered him. The evidence he'd left there would be hard to miss. Spent shell casings, a discarded pack, signs of a hasty camp. She entered slowly, weapon raised, those amber eyes tracking every shadow. Callum watched from his concealed position on the rim, 30 feet above. She moved deeper, confident now. Then she saw the cache. He'd left it partially hidden under a tarp near the canyon's dead end. Bait that looked like a panicked mistake. She approached cautiously, used her rifle barrel to flip the tarp back, and froze. Pieces of armor. Weapon components, a cracked helmet with biological residue still visible. All of it clearly alien, all of it from one of her own kind. She pivoted, bringing her rifle up, but Callum had already moved. By the time she tracked him, he'd descended the far wall and was vanishing into the forest beyond. He didn't look back. He knew what she'd found, knew what she'd be thinking, knew that everything had just changed. The hunt was no longer simple. Her prey had killed one of her kind, had studied their technology, had been preparing for her specifically. The roar of rage that echoed through the canyon confirmed she'd realized all of it at once. Kyrath's claws scored deep grooves in the canyon rock as she stared at the remains. Drekkar's armor, his weapon cores. The cracked faceplate still bore the hunter's mark of their clan. She'd known him, trained with him. He'd been arrogant and reckless, but he'd been a warrior. And this human had killed him. She activated her comm link. Valid status report. All systems nominal, no additional threats detected. Rescan for human settlements within 50 miles. Negative. The target appears to be operating alone. Alone, like her. She'd come expecting a simple hunt, a chance to prove herself worthy of advancement. Earth species was supposed to be weak, barely past their industrial age. The evidence before her told a different story. When did we lose contact with Drekkar? 2 Earth years, 3 months ago. His last message indicated successful planetfall. No distress signal was received. 2 years. This human had been studying the technology, learning, preparing. She lifted a piece of chest armor, noting where it had been modified. Clean work. Precise. Kyrath's ears flattened. She'd been tracking this human for hours, and every assumption had proven wrong. He moved through wilderness like he'd been born to it. He'd anticipated her approaches, prepared escape routes, and now she knew he'd been deliberately leading her. Playing with her. Her tail lashed. No prey had ever done this. In 3 years of sanctioned hunts across a dozen worlds, she'd never failed to bring down her target within the first solar cycle. The elders would be watching her performance metrics. This human was making her look incompetent. She needed to adapt, stop treating this like a hunt and start treating it like combat. Kyrath pulled up the tactical display on her wrist, overlaying topographical data. He'd been leading her northeast toward higher elevations where forest thinned and rock dominated. That suggested either a stronghold or another prepared position. She smiled, showing teeth designed to tear flesh. Kyrath unclipped the compact drone from her belt and sent it airborne. Its sensors would give her aerial surveillance and detect heat signatures through most cover. The human had fooled her ground-based sensors with local minerals, but he couldn't hide body temperature from above. The drone climbed rapidly. There, a heat signature 2 miles northeast, moving through a boulder field, too large to be wildlife, too deliberate to be random. She broke into a run, covering ground with powerful strides. The forest blurred past. Her body was engineered for this. Within minutes, she'd closed half the distance. The feed updated, the signature had stopped. Kyrath slowed, dropping into a crouch. Her ears rotated forward, wind through needles, a stream to her left, the distant cry of a raptor. Nothing that suggested ambush. She moved forward carefully, rifle raised. The boulder field opened ahead, a maze of granite blocks the size of her ship. The signature was stationary near the center, behind a large formation. She circled wide, approaching from an angle the tracking suggested was unobserved. 30 meters, 20. She could see the boulder's edge now. 10 meters. She raised the rifle, finger on the trigger. She spun around the corner. Empty. Kyrath snarled. She pivoted and saw it. A thermal blanket draped over a sun-heated rock. A decoy. Something whistled. Kyrath threw herself sideways, but the projectile wasn't aimed at her. It hit her drone with a sharp crack, and the device tumbled from the sky. Movement above. She looked up as Callum Beck dropped from a 15-foot height, landing in a roll that brought him up with that rifle aimed at her center mass. 20 feet separated them. The barrel pointed at her exposed throat. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled. "You're studying me," he said. Kyrath's translator processed the words. She straightened slowly, keeping her weapon pointed at him. "You studied Drekkar," she replied in English. "I had 2 years to learn from my mistakes. You think killing one of us makes you dangerous? I think you're here alone, just like he was. I think your people send individual hunters because you're arrogant, and I think you followed me into terrain I chose." His accuracy was infuriating. Kyrath's tail lashed. "You cannot win this. I've been winning it all morning. You've been running. I've destroyed your drone, learned your patterns, and gotten you exactly where I wanted you." Kyrath's ears flattened. She ran tactical calculations. Rush him, possible, but he'd get a shot off. Retreat, tactically sound but humiliating. Fire first, her weapon was faster, but not by much. "Why did you come here?" Callum asked. "Earth's quarantined. Your people made first contact 50 years ago. So why the secret hunts?" "You know nothing. I know Drekkar had no official authorization. I know your government doesn't know you're here, and I know you'll have trouble explaining a failed hunt." The truth stung. This was supposed to be a proving ground where young warriors could test themselves against a primitive species. The elders turned blind eyes to occasional training exercises near Earth. Drekkar's disappearance had been explained as equipment failure. 2 missing hunters would raise questions. "You planned this," Kyrath said. "The cache, the decoy, you wanted me to find Drekkar's remains. I wanted you to know you weren't hunting an easy target. I wanted you off balance, and I wanted you angry enough to make mistakes." "I have made no mistakes. You're standing in the open having a conversation with your prey." Kyrath's weapon discharged. The energy bolt screamed across the space, but Callum was already moving. He'd been waiting for it and dropped behind cover as the bolt carved a molten furrow through stone. She rushed forward. This was her element now, close quarters where strength and speed mattered. She cleared the boulder and found him bringing the rifle around. Kyrath batted it aside. The weapon clattered across stone. She followed with a strike aimed at his head, claws extended. He ducked and drove his shoulder into her midsection, using her momentum. They went down together, rolling across rough stone. She was stronger, but he was heavier than expected and better trained. They broke apart, both coming to their feet. Kyrath's claws were out. Callum had drawn a knife. "Last chance to walk away," he said. "Warriors do not flee." He came at her low and fast. Kyrath twisted, letting the blade pass within inches, and snapped a kick at his knee. He took the impact and pivoted into a slash that forced her back. They circled, trading strikes. Kyrath had fought opponents from a dozen species, but Callum moved differently, no wasted motion, just efficient, brutal technique. She feinted high, went low, scored blood across his forearm. He barely noticed, returning with a strike that would have opened her throat if she hadn't jerked back. The fight spilled across the boulder field. Kyrath's superior strength began to tell. She drove him back. His movements slowed fractionally, fatigue setting in, where her engineered endurance kept her fresh. She saw her opening, caught his wrist, twisted hard. The blade fell. She drove her knee into his stomach, doubling him over, then brought both fists down on his back. He went down hard. Kyrath planted her boot on his spine, rifle aimed at his skull. "You fought well," she said, "for prey." Callum coughed, turned his head. Blood ran from his nose, but he was smiling. "Got you exactly where I wanted you." The words didn't make sense until she felt the give beneath her boot. Pressure plate. The net deployed from the ground, spring-loaded and impossibly fast. Energy fields crackled as it wrapped around her, her own species' binding technology locking her muscles. Kyrath tried to move, tried to tear free, but the net was designed to hold beings of her strength. She went down hard, the rifle clattering away. Callum rolled out. He stood over her. 8 months to build that trap, he said quietly, worth every minute. Kyrath snarled wordlessly, fighting the bonds, but the energy field held. She was caught, completely caught by her prey. The energy net hummed against Kyrath's skin, each pulse sending waves of paralysis through her nervous system. She lay on her side, unable to move anything but her eyes and jaw. Every muscle in her body had locked rigid, held by technology her own people had developed to capture dangerous prey. The irony burned worse than any physical wound. Callum circled her slowly, keeping his distance, that knife still in his hand. His movements were careful, calculated. Blood dripped from his forearm where she'd scored him, and he favored his left side slightly where her knee had connected with his ribs. But he was standing, and she wasn't. "The binding field will hold for about 6 hours," he said, his voice conversational despite the violence they'd just exchanged. "Long enough to get you secured properly, then we can talk." Kyrath tried to snarl, but even her vocal cords were locked. All that came out was a strangled hiss. "I know you can hear me," Callum continued. "The field paralyzes motor function but leaves sensory nerves intact. Drecker's equipment logs were very detailed about that. Something about ensuring captured prey remains aware of its situation." He crouched just outside her reach, studying her with those calm, analytical eyes. Up close, she could see the scars that marked him. A thin line across his left eyebrow, another along his jaw, dozens more probably hidden under his clothing. This was a man who'd survived things that should have killed him. "I'm going to move you now," he said. "My cabin's about 2 miles from here. Storm's coming in tonight, and neither of us wants to be out in it." Callum stood and walked away. Kyrath tried to track him with her eyes, but he moved behind her, out of her limited field of vision. She heard scraping sounds, then felt something slide beneath her immobilized body, a stretcher of some kind, crude but functional. He'd planned for this, all of it, the trap, the capture, even the transport. How long had he been preparing? The stretcher began to move, dragging across stone and then dirt as Callum hauled her through the boulder field. Her perspective tilted as he navigated the terrain, sometimes pulling her up inclines, other times lowering her carefully down slopes. The paralysis meant she couldn't brace herself, couldn't adjust to the movement. She was completely at his mercy. The forest canopy closed overhead as they entered the trees. Kyrath caught glimpses of sky through the branches, noticed the clouds building to the west. He was right about the storm. The temperature had dropped, and the wind carried the electric charge that preceded mountain weather. Time became difficult to track. The paralysis affected her sense of her body's position, making everything feel disjointed and strange. She focused on what she could observe: the trees, the angle of light filtering through leaves, the rhythm of Callum's breathing as he pulled her weight. He stopped once to rest, sitting on a fallen log where she could see him. He drank from a canteen, then checked his injured arm. The cut wasn't deep, already clotting. He wrapped it with practiced efficiency, securing the bandage one-handed. "You're probably wondering why I didn't kill you," he said, looking at her. "Drekar attacked hikers, innocent people just trying to enjoy the mountains. I drove him off a cliff because he wouldn't stop, wouldn't leave. But you came for me specifically. That makes this different." Kyrath wanted to argue, to tell him that she'd have killed him without hesitation if their positions were reversed, but the words stayed locked inside. "I've been alone up here for 2 years," Callum continued, "ever since Kandahar. Ever since I watched my entire team die because someone behind a desk made a bad call based on bad intelligence. I came here to disappear, to not be responsible for anyone else's life or death." He stood, shouldering the stretcher again. "Then Drekar showed up, and suddenly I had a choice. Let him keep hunting, keep killing, or do something about it. So I did something. And then I spent 2 years waiting to see if more would come, preparing for when they did." They moved through increasingly familiar terrain. Kyrath recognized the landmarks from her earlier pursuit. They were backtracking toward where she'd first picked up his trail. The cabin appeared through the trees, exactly as she'd mapped it from her aerial scans. Small, defensible, positioned in a natural depression. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd left a fire burning before he'd gone to meet her. Callum dragged her inside. The interior was sparse but organized. A bunk, a stove, weapons and equipment arranged with military precision, and in the corner, restraints that looked like they'd been built specifically for someone of her species' physiology. He transferred her from the stretcher to a reinforced chair, securing her with straps and chains while the energy net still held her immobile. The work was methodical, thorough. He checked each connection twice, ensured every restraint was properly positioned. When he was finished, she was locked in place even without the net's field. Callum stepped back, studying his work, then moved to the stove to add wood to the fire. The cabin warmed quickly. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the roof. "The net will wear off in about 3 hours," he said, pulling up a second chair and sitting across from her. "When it does, you'll find the restraints are made from Drekar's armor plating. You're strong, but not strong enough to break them. The chains are rated for twice your estimated pull strength." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So here's what's going to happen. When you can talk again, we're going to have a conversation. You're going to tell me about your people, your government, and why they think humans are acceptable prey. And I'm going to decide what to do with you." Kyrath managed the smallest movement, a slight narrowing of her eyes, a promise. Callum smiled slightly. "Yeah. I know you're thinking about all the ways you're going to kill me once you get free. That's fine. Hold on to that anger. But while you're plotting, consider this. I've been 3 steps ahead of you since you landed. What makes you think that's changed?" Thunder rumbled outside and the storm broke in earnest. The paralysis faded in stages, sensation returning like pins and needles through Kyrath's entire body. First her extremities, fingers and toes flexing weakly against their restraints, then her limbs, testing the chains and finding them exactly as unyielding as Callum had promised. Finally her core, her breathing deepening as control returned. Through it all, he sat across from her, watching, not gloating, not threatening, just watching with that same analytical patience that had defined every move he'd made. The storm hammered the cabin's roof, wind driving rain against the walls in sheets. Lightning flickered through the single window, followed by thunder that shook the timbers. They were sealed in together, predator and prey, with roles reversed. "Can you speak?" Callum asked. Kyrath worked her jaw, testing. Her tongue felt thick but functional. "Yes," she managed. "Good. Want water?" The question surprised her. She'd expected interrogation, threats, perhaps torture. Not basic consideration. She hesitated, pride warring with thirst, then nodded once. Callum stood and filled a cup from a container near the stove. He brought it to her lips, tipping it carefully. The water was cold, clean, washing away the metallic taste the paralysis had left. "Thank you," she said, hating how the words felt like weakness. "You're welcome." He returned to his chair. For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled, rain drummed. Kyrath studied him in the flickering light, noting details she'd missed. The way he held himself, always balanced. The intelligence in his eyes that went beyond tactics. The control that kept him calm even now. "You said you wanted to talk," Kyrath finally said. "So, talk. Tell me about your people. Start with why you hunt." "We are warriors. Hunting is sacred. It proves strength, cunning, worthiness to lead." "And humans are what, practice targets?" Kyrath's ears flattened. "Your species is young, undeveloped. When the Council made first contact, they classified Earth as protected but not prohibited. Warriors may come here for unsanctioned hunts because your people are considered negligible." Negligible. The word hung between them, sharp as any blade. "You have no interstellar capability, no unified government. You war among yourselves. By galactic standards, you are primitives. Primitives who killed Drekar. Primitives who captured you." "Anomalies," Kyrath said, but the word felt hollow. "You are outliers." "Are we?" Callum leaned back. "Or are your people's assumptions about humanity fundamentally flawed? You came here expecting an easy hunt. Instead, you got outmaneuvered, outfought, and captured by someone using your own technology. How many other warriors have underestimated humans and died for it?" Kyrath said nothing. The question cut too close to thoughts she'd been having since finding Drekar's cache. "I've read some of your equipment logs," Callum continued. "Your people have been watching Earth for decades. You've documented our progress, our development, our conflicts. But you've never actually engaged with us as equals. You've just observed, cataloged, and dismissed. Because you are not equals. Then how am I sitting here free while you're in chains?" The logic was infuriating because it was sound. Kyrath pulled against her restraints, felt the metal bite, accomplished nothing. "This proves nothing," she said. "You are one human. An exceptional one, perhaps, but one." "I'm a traumatized veteran, living alone in the mountains," Callum corrected. "I'm not special forces anymore. I'm not active military. I'm just someone who spent 2 years studying alien technology in a cabin. If I can do this, what could humanity do if we knew we were being hunted? If we prepared as a species?" Kyrath's tail lashed against the chair. "You would lose. Our technology is centuries beyond yours. Can all be countered by someone who understands how it works. Technology isn't magic, it's just applied science, and humans are very good at reverse engineering things." He stood and moved to his workbench, returning with one of Drekar's weapon cores. The crystalline matrix glowed faintly. "This stores energy in a quantum suspension matrix. The discharge is controlled by a resonance frequency specific to your species' neural patterns. Drekar probably thought it was impossible for a human to use." Callum touched a contact point. It hummed to life, responding to his touch. "Took me 6 months to figure out how to bypass the biometric locks. Another 3 to build an interface that could translate human neural patterns. It's not elegant, but it works." He set the core down and returned to his chair. "That's what humans do. We adapt, we learn. We take what we're given and make it serve our purposes. You think we're primitive, but we're survivors. Underestimating that has been your species' mistake." Kyrath stared at him, something cold settling in her stomach. Not fear. Recognition of truth she'd been trained not to see. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Information, then a choice." "What choice?" "Whether to tell your people the truth or protect them from it." Kyrath's ears swiveled forward. "Explain." Callum leaned forward. If you report what happened here, that a single human captured you using salvage technology, your people will have to reevaluate their assumptions. They might stop the illegal hunts. They might take us seriously as a potential threat. Or they might decide we're too dangerous and need to be eliminated before we develop further. And if I do not report the truth? You tell them humans are too unpredictable to hunt safely. Recommend Earth be placed under stricter quarantine. No more warriors coming here. No more humans dying because your people see us as sport. You would trust me to do this? No, Callum said simply, but I don't have to trust you. I just have to give you sufficient motivation. He stood and moved to the window looking out at the storm. You're a warrior. You value honor, strength, proving worth. Being captured by prey destroys all of that. If you go home and tell the truth, you'll be humiliated, demoted, possibly exiled. Kyrath's claws flexed. But if you lie, Callum continued, if you say humans are dangerously unpredictable and unsuitable for hunting, you save face. You complete your mission and return with valuable intelligence. Your people stop coming to Earth and everyone wins. Except you hold this over me, the knowledge that I failed. I hold the truth. What you do with it is your choice. Thunder cracked overhead. The fire guttered, then steadied. Callum returned to his chair. There's a third option, he said quietly. What option? You could stay for a while. Learn about humans instead of hunting them. See if your people's assumptions hold up to actual experience. Kyrath stared at him. Stay as your prisoner? As someone gathering intelligence. You said warriors value proving worth through challenge. Well, here's a challenge. Understand your enemy. Really understand them. Then make your report based on actual knowledge instead of cultural prejudice. You would let me live here, free? Eventually, once we establish ground rules, and I'm confident you won't try to kill me the moment I release you. Why would you do this? Callum was quiet for a long moment. Because 2 years ago, I made decisions based on bad intelligence. People died, my friends died, and I've spent every day since wondering if things could have been different if someone had just taken the time to really understand the situation. He looked at her directly. Your people are making the same mistake. They're acting on assumptions about humanity that aren't accurate. Eventually, that's going to lead to conflict. I can't stop that by myself, but maybe I can start by giving one warrior a reason to question what she's been taught. The proposition was insane. Stay here with the human who'd captured her? And yet, beneath the humiliation and anger, something else stirred. Curiosity, the same drive that had made her a warrior, the need to test herself against challenges that mattered. I will consider this, Kyrath said finally. That's all I ask. Callum moved toward the bunk. I'm going to sleep. You'll stay restrained tonight. Tomorrow, if you agree to ground rules, I'll release one hand so you can eat. He paused, looking back. For what it's worth, you fought well today. Better than Drecker. If circumstances were different, I think I'd have enjoyed fighting beside you instead of against you. Then he lay down and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing had evened into sleep. She sat in her restraints, listening to the storm, and tried to understand how she'd gone from hunter to captive to whatever this was becoming. Morning light filtered through the cabin window, pale and clean after the storm. Kyrath had spent the night in her restraints, dozing fitfully, her body protesting the immobility. Callum rose with the dawn, moving through his routine with the same methodical efficiency she'd observed during the hunt. He stoked the fire, boiled water, prepared food. The smell of cooking made her stomach clench with hunger she refused to acknowledge. Callum approached with a plate and fork. I'm going to release your right hand, he said. You try anything, and you'll be locked down again for another 24 hours. Understood? Nodded once. He unlocked the restraint on her wrist. Her arm dropped, muscles screaming as blood flow returned fully. She flexed her fingers, working, feeling back into them, acutely aware that Callum had positioned himself just outside her reach. Even with one hand free, she couldn't touch him. He handed her the plate. Eggs, some kind of meat, bread, simple food, but her body needed it. She ate slowly, maintaining what dignity she could while bound to a chair. I've decided, she said between bites. Callum waited, his expression neutral. I will stay, learn what you want me to learn, then I will make my report. Ground rules first. You don't try to kill me, escape, or contact your ship without permission. You follow my lead in the wilderness because you don't know this terrain, and you answer my questions honestly. And in return, I release you from the restraints. I teach you what I know about surviving here. I answer your questions about humanity honestly. And when you're ready to leave, I let you go with whatever intelligence you've gathered. Kyrath studied him, searching for deception. She found only that same steady certainty that had defined him since their first encounter. Agreed, she said finally. Callum produced a key and began unlocking the remaining restraints. Kyrath felt each chain fall away, felt her body recognize its freedom even as her mind calculated distances and attack angles. She could rush him now, probably overpower him despite his preparations. But then what? She didn't know this world, didn't know how to survive its winters or navigate its terrain without technology. And beneath those practical considerations, something else held her back. Curiosity about what this human could teach her, about whether her people's assumptions would survive actual scrutiny. She stood slowly, working circulation back into her legs. Her muscles protested, stiff from the night's immobility. Callum had stepped back, giving her space, but keeping that knife within easy reach. There's a stream about 50 yards east, he said. You can wash up. I'll have clothes that might fit when you get back. You planned for this. I planned for several possibilities. This was one of them. Kyrath moved to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Why do you really want me to stay? Callum met her eyes. Because every war I've ever seen started because two sides didn't understand each other, because intelligence and assumptions aren't the same thing, and because maybe, just maybe, you and I can prevent the next misunderstanding from costing lives. She stepped outside into morning air that smelled of rain and pine. The forest stretched around her, alien and beautiful. She could run now, try to reach her ship, call for extraction. But Callum was right about one thing. She'd return home with nothing but humiliation and questions. Or she could stay, gather real intelligence, return with something valuable. Kyrath found the stream and washed away the sweat and dirt of combat and captivity. The cold water cleared her head, helped her think. She was a warrior of the hunter caste. She'd come to prove herself against prey, and instead found an opponent who'd bested her through preparation and understanding rather than superior strength. That meant something, she just wasn't sure what yet. When she returned to the cabin, Callum had laid out clothing, rough but functional, sized for someone of her build. She dressed, noting how he'd turned his back to give her privacy. Another unexpected courtesy. We'll start with basics, Callum said once she was ready. Fire building without technology, shelter construction, water purification, navigation by stars and landmarks, everything I learned from living here. This is what you consider valuable intelligence. This is how humans survived and thrived on a world that tried to kill them for millions of years. No advanced technology, no genetic enhancements, just adaptation, innovation, and refusal to quit. You want to understand what makes us dangerous? Start with understanding what made us survivors. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Callum taught and Kyrath learned how to read weather in the clouds and wind, how to identify plants that healed versus plants that killed, how to move through wilderness without leaving trace, how to find food where none seemed to exist. She watched him work with his hands, creating tools from raw materials with patience and precision. Watched him plan 3 steps ahead, always preparing for possibilities. Watched him treat the environment with respect rather than dominance. At night they talked. He asked about her world, her culture, her people's history. She answered and found herself questioning assumptions she'd never examined. Why did her people value individual combat over cooperation? Why did they measure worth through domination rather than contribution? Why did they see other species as either threats or prey, never as potential equals? Callum shared his own stories, the team he'd lost, the guilt that had driven him here, the isolation he'd chosen because connection felt too dangerous after loss. She recognized that isolation, understood it in ways she hadn't expected. On the fifth night, as they sat by the fire watching sparks rise toward stars, Kyrath spoke the thought she'd been avoiding. "My people are wrong about humanity." Callum glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "Everything. Your adaptability, your refusal to accept limitations, the way you turn weakness into strength through innovation. We have been watching you for decades and seeing only primitives. We should have been seeing potential." "Potential for what?" "Danger, partnership, something that could reshape galactic politics if you ever reach the stars." She looked at him directly. "When I return, I will tell them the truth, not the comfortable lie you offered, the real truth, that humans are not prey, that Earth should not be treated as a proving ground, that your species deserves to be recognized as emerging power, not dismissed as primitives." "That will cost you." "Yes," Kyrath said simply, "but some truths are worth the cost." Callum was quiet for a long moment. "When will you leave?" "Soon, before I forget what I am and what I owe my people, before—" She trailed off, but the unspoken words hung between them. "Before this becomes something neither of them could walk away from cleanly." "Before," Callum agreed quietly. 2 nights later, they stood outside her ship. She'd sent the signal, and Valis had brought the vessel to the coordinates. Kyrath wore her armor again, carried her weapons, looked every inch the warrior she'd been when she arrived. But everything had changed. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for what she meant. "Survive the telling," Callum replied. "Make them listen." She moved toward the ship's ramp, paused. "If I return someday, would you—" "I'll be here," Callum said, "waiting to see if you change their minds or if I need to prepare for the next hunter." Kyrath smiled, showing teeth. "If you see another ship, it will be me, and I will not be hunting." She entered the vessel, and the ramp sealed behind her. Through the viewport, she saw Callum standing in the clearing, watching her leave. The human who'd caught the hunter, the man who'd treated his captive with honor and taught her to see her own people's flaws. As the ship climbed toward orbit, Kyrath began composing her report. Not the lie that would save her reputation, not the careful omission that would preserve her status. The truth, complete and unfiltered, about humanity's potential and her people's dangerous assumptions. She would pay for that truth. But as Callum had taught her through example, some things were worth more than personal comfort. Some things were worth fighting for. Even if it meant fighting against everything you'd been taught to believe,